I don't have time to play, baby. Okay, give me the bone. Come on. Come on. Give me the bone. Drop it. So, today I'm going to be talking about Patreon. I'm going to be talking about how my Patreon is set up, my experiences, the pros, the cons, and then what I recommend that you should do to set up your Patreon and to make money on Patreon. So, I just want to preface this by saying that I overall think that you should start a Patreon. I think there's nothing to lose. What I'm going to be talking about, there's a lot of really great things about it, and then there are a lot of not so great things about it, but none of them are deal breakers. I really do recommend it wholeheartedly. So with that said, I'm going to get into it. I have been on Patreon since December of 2019, so I'm about to hit my year mark. And my Patreon has changed so much. It's kind of ridiculous. When I started, I wasn't selling candles yet. I was still in the sort of research and testing phase. I think in April was when I added candles and wax melts to my Patreon store. So I did not start out with selling candles. I started out with a monthly print and a sticker. Once I added candles to my store, I started doing customs, which I do not recommend. I mean, imagine doing 20 plus different candles every month. The keeping track and materials of that is kind of ridiculous. Bless you. So my Patreon now, and what I think is its final form, is that every you want to be on camera, huh? Can I keep going, or is it the Mabel show? Thank you. Every month I have my patrons suggest a theme, and then I put that to a vote, and then whatever theme wins, I pick out scents that I think would suit that. I also put that to a vote, and then that is how everything is decided. So every month there's a theme and a scent for the whole month. So I have wax melts, I have candles, and then I have a tier where you can get both and a coupon. So everything is the same, it's all standardized, it's much easier to keep track of everything and to get everything done. Now that I've sort of described how my Patreon works, I want to talk about the things that I really like about Patreon, so all of my positives with the app and with my experience. Patreon is the most community-oriented platform that I've ever been on that has this sort of payment model. So, you know, on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and whatever, I think it's so impersonal and it moves so fast. It's hard to sort of build a community and get to know people without really going out of your way. So I really like Patreon. There's just a really strong sense of community, not in just my own Patreon, but with other creators that I'm subscribed to. I feel like you get to know people really well. There's a sort of honesty within Patreon that I really enjoy. I think you get just the most basic sense of who someone is on Patreon. You know, you put your best foot forward on social media, and I think Patreon is a place to sort of let that down and just be yourself. A lot of people can get to know a creator, their struggles, their positives, more of their personal life. I know that on my Patreon, that was where I started doing videos before I ever did YouTube, and I was really nervous to even have my voice on a recording, but my patrons got to know me that way. They get to see everything before the rest of the world does. I just talk in general about the good and the bad, but you also get to know everybody really well. I recognize all of my patrons on any social media that I see them on otherwise. I know a lot of their birthdays. I know their likes, their dislikes. So it's just a really great way to get to know people. Is that I just love the community, not only the one that I've built, but the ones that I've joined. I think it's just a really great place to get to know your favorite creators. I think that Patreon has allowed myself and a lot of other creators to sort of explore and grow in a safe space, because for the most part, I would assume that if someone is subscribed to a creator, that they like that creator, that they're in their corner. So if I'm sort of contemplating something or considering something, I know that I can try it on Patreon without any judgment, without people getting upset with me for trying something new. All of my patrons are incredibly lovely people. I think there is a sort of safe space within Patreon because you know that they're there for you. Despite all the rewards that I may offer, I know that my patrons just vibe with me and my shop and what I'm trying to do, which is really special. And with that, I feel like I can sort of branch out and try new things and get their support and get their honest feedback. So that is one of the things that I love, as well as just the model of it. It's a monthly subscription service, so you know what you're gonna get month to month, especially if you can retain patrons on a month-to-month basis. You basically have a salary, and I'm not saying you're gonna be making big bazillion bucks, but even if it's $50, you know that you're gonna get $50 every month, which is super cool. So I think that is also a really big strength, especially if you're a creator that's based on sales month to month or interaction. A lot of things are uncertain, but Patreon can be one of those certain things for you, especially if you're trying to live off of what you're doing, whether you're a YouTuber, an influencer, an online business. Patreon is a great way to sort of keep a level cushion on what you're doing, especially if you can grow it well enough to keep all of your necessities paid and things like that. I'll talk about later how to actually make sure that your Patreon is profitable, because that is the biggest struggle that I have had. But once you get a hang on everything, then you know what you're going to make month to month. So those are all the things that I really enjoy about Patreon, and I think are really great strengths that you don't get on any other platform. I don't even know of other subscription-based services besides maybe like OnlyFans or something, so there's really nothing like Patreon, and that's why I do recommend it. But with that, I do have to talk about the negatives. There are a lot of negatives in my opinion. None of them have made me ever want to quit per se. I mean, we all get burnout and we all get low points, but there's never been a moment within Patreon where I was like, I just absolutely cannot do this anymore. So I want you to take all of my negatives with a grain of salt. Anyone from Patreon ever manages to find this video, please don't kick me off your platform. I do love it. I am saying that I support it. But there are just some things that I think, considering everything that I have to say, is pretty bonkers. So I'm just gonna get started with the first negative, or the first con that I have. And this is the biggest one, is that the user interface for Patreon is bananas. It is ridiculous. It does not make a lick of sense. So based on what I use on my phone, I use Patreon on my phone, on my iPad, and on my laptop. And none of the things that I do on any of those devices can I do across the board. So something I do on my phone does not work on the laptop version. Something I do on my iPad does not work on the laptop version. All the stuff that I can do on my laptop does not work on the mobile. And it just doesn't make any sense, because you'd think that if you make an app for a creator, that they can get all of their basic functionality. And I don't expect a mobile version to have everything available, but the fact that not all of the necessities for running a Patreon are on the mobile, and the fact that there's a bunch of stuff on the desktop that just doesn't make sense, is so weird to me. And I think as a creator, it can be really frustrating, especially if you get a lot of growth all of a sudden, or if you offer a new reward. It can be really hard to catch up and get a handle on things, because the way that you access information on Patreon, it's so complicated, because you have to jump through so many hoops. There's all these categories under patrons and benefits and relationship manager that don't tell you all of the information that you need. So you have to go through several categories to get the full picture of what you need to send out rewards or to fulfill your rewards or whatever you're doing. So that is so frustrating, as well as the app, at least, is just kind of broken. So let's say that a patron messages me and they have a question, and then I respond and they say, thanks, that helped, or whatever. All of those messages show up in the inbox as new conversation threads, even though it is with the same person in the same conversation on the same day. It shows up as a new thread. So my inbox will have the same person listed over and over again, and it's so full, and I miss messages from my patrons all the time, and I feel so bad about it. And it's just one of those things on the app that is just so broken, as well as like the fact that the email system is really weird. I've had a lot of patrons that just don't get any emails. I've had a lot of times where a patron puts in something wrong, like their address or whatever, and they just don't know how to fix it because it's so convoluted. And that goes on the creator side as well. Like, I have a couple patrons who put in usernames, which is absolutely fine, but then when I go to export their information for a shipping label, it uses their username and I can't change that. So if Sparkly Kitty 27 gets a candle every month and I export their information, the shipping label is gonna say Sparkly Kitty 27. Like, that's not a person. So I think that that's just another weird little thing. The whole exporting of information and gathering information and editing information is just so unhelpful that I think it makes it really frustrating on both ends, not just as a creator, but as a patron. A lot of people are very frustrated and they don't understand. And I think that's pretty annoying that as a creator, I'm having to explain how the app works to a bunch of patrons when they should just get to enjoy the content they paid for right out of the gate. They shouldn't have to ask me how to use it. So I think that's a pretty big detriment to the service just as a whole, is that it's not very user friendly. I know that a lot of my patrons just don't even go on the app. they get their monthly candle or whatever, and they just don't get any of the other benefits because the app is so frustrating to use. You know, I don't get very high engagement, even though I have 55 patrons. I average about 14 likes and a few comments on every post. So a lot of people aren't even seeing all the benefits that they're paying for. And I think that's just kind of bonkers. The next problem that I have with Patreon kind of catapults off of the user interface issue is that they charge a pretty hefty fee considering that their website kind of sucks. I think I'm in the 8% fee. You know, there's different options and with each option has a different functionality. So I think I'm in the middle where I have like above basic, but I'm not the full access, whatever. But considering they take 8% of my earnings every month and they just have like a ridiculous website is kind of frustrating. And I know that website fees are the foundation of how they make their money. It makes absolute sense that they have a fee. I would never expect them not to have a fee because that's just how the way things work. But I think that the fee is really steep considering what they offer. The app feels like it's from 2009 and it just doesn't work very well. So those are the drawbacks that I have for Patreon. The last negative that I have, and this one is kind of my fault, that's why it's like at the end and it's like it's gonna segue into my advice for Patreon, but their system for creating your Patreon is really rigid. So what I mean by this is that Patreon has two models for charging your patrons. You can either charge a patron on the first of every month, or you can charge them when they sign up and then on the first of every month. And this might not sound like a huge distinction, but this basically means that they're either gonna get their rewards whenever they sign up or on the first of every month and from then thereafter. So this is pretty detrimental to me because I chose to charge my patrons when they sign up and then the first of every month afterwards because of how I had started my Patreon. But now that it has grown, it's pretty frustrating that somebody could sign up to get rewards on the 29th of October, and that means they're entitled to October's rewards. So I have to scramble to make them a candle when I've made all the rest of the rewards already and things like that, versus if I had only charged on the first of the month, then they could join in any time in October and not get charged and not be eligible for the rewards until November. Based on how I run my Patreon, it's just pretty hard to keep track of, and that's something that I should have thought about more, but it's pretty frustrating that you're locked into that choice. There is no room to change it. So that also goes into the pricing. Each tier you choose the pricing, and I didn't really understand the cost of goods, the cost of my time, the cost of shipping when I started, and again, that's fully on me. But it's pretty frustrating that you can't change it. Once a patron has subscribed to a tier, that tier price is locked in. And I understand that you can't just like change prices on someone willy-nilly when they're already subscribed, but I wish that you could change it with permission or the next month or something like that. Like the fact that it's absolutely locked in is a little bit frustrating because, to be quite honest, I'm not really making a profit on Patreon the way things are going, just because when I started my Patreon, I didn't really have as much knowledge of what I was doing. So as I've grown, my prices don't get to grow with me, and I'm not really making a profit. And that's okay for me because I just love my patrons and I love the community and I love the experience of what I'm doing. But if you were relying on something as paying your rent or your groceries, you would need to know really far in advance how much it's going to cost you, and it sort of limits your growth. So even if I had made my Patreon when I knew exactly what I was worth, exactly what my skills were, there would be no way to expand on that. So let's say I wanted to start adding things to my product, I would either have to eat the cost or start a new tier or kick everybody off the tier. There's just really no way to grow. It's pretty stagnant. So that is my last con. That actually segues into my advice for starting a successful Patreon. I basically have two pieces of advice that I really messed up on and I wish that I had known. So with everything that I have said, like I said, I do recommend starting a Patreon, but there are certain things that you should consider. So the first thing, like I said, is to know exactly how much your rewards are going to be worth, because once they're set, you can't change them. So I think that you just need to have everything planned out before you start. So know the cost of your goods, know the time you're going to be putting into it, know how much it's going to cost to ship it, or if you're just doing digital rewards, know how much time you're going to be putting into it and know how much that is worth. As well as, like, I recommend not just posting once a month and leaving. I recommend posting at least once a week with some sort of behind the scenes or preview or something like that. And consider how long those posts are going to take you. And so knowing all of this, price that accordingly. because like I said, you can't change the prices when someone is joined, and you want to be profitable. You want to know what you're making month to month and what it's going to cost. That's just the best way to do things. Hey baby, what's up? You want to hang out? You want to be in the video? So that is my biggest piece of advice, is to just plan what you're doing in advance, to know what you're getting into. Like I said, it is really stagnant, but once you get a hang of that, I think it's really easy to get things rolling as long as you have a plan in place. And that goes into my second piece of advice, is to have a schedule. Because I think with having deadlines, with having month-to-month obligations, you're more likely to face burnout. I know that I face burnout more on Patreon than I have on anything else, and I think that's just the nature of the way it works with the schedule and obligations. So make sure that you have a plan for yourself, whether you have posts lined up for the whole month or you have your rewards made really early. I think give yourself a buffer, give yourself a schedule, and make sure that you're just really honest with your patrons. Can I help you? I think as long as you have a plan in place, even when that fails, just be honest, just be transparent. You know, there's nothing wrong with messing up or needing like mental health time or something like that. And there's always going to be unforeseen circumstances. But the only time I've really seen a patron crash and burn is when they just like ghosted their patrons and they weren't really forthcoming about what was happening behind the scenes. So do the best you can to set yourself up for success. But there's always going to be a time when you can't meet it. So I think just be prepared to be honest, be transparent. You know, the people that are subscribed to you want to support you, they want to root for you. So don't give them any reason not to. You know, just be very aware of the fact that they're giving you money every month because they care about you and they like what you're doing. Don't ever take that for granted. I know that those seem really basic, but coming from someone who did not have those things in mind when they started, I wish that I had done that. Like I said, my Patreon is not super profitable, and I think that it could have been if I had thought about things a little bit more. So that's my advice for starting a Patreon, as well as my pros and my cons and my experience. With all that said, I think absolutely start a Patreon. There's absolutely nothing to stop you. There's no cost. There's nothing that you need in advance besides what you have to offer. So as long as you've thought it through, I think absolutely start a Patreon. And a lot of people have that fear of like, what if nobody subscribes to me? What if there's no reason to do it? I genuinely think that you will be surprised by who wants to support you and who's already been in your corner. And so given this extra opportunity, I think a lot of people are going to want to be there for you. And even if nobody's there in the beginning, you can sort of get your feel for it when people start to join, because there is no way that nobody will join. I promise that you have something to offer for somebody and you'll have a really good time. So absolutely join Patreon when you think it's right. Keep everything in mind that I just said, and if you do have a Patreon or if you're starting one, I would love to see it down below. Mine is going to be in the description box with all of the other information. So I think that's the end of this video. I hope that you found this helpful. I don't see a lot of people talking about Patreon from like the creator side. I know that I knew nothing going into it, so I hope that you'll be better off than I was. I'm glad to help in any way that I can. If you liked this video, if you want to know more about what I do, you can like and subscribe and join the Candle Club, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.